The datapad felt insignificant in Vylos' clawed grip, a flimsy rectangle of glass and light that contained the supposed logic of the Galactic Council. He sat in the observation gallery of the High Bastion, the primary military academy for the sector, his tail coiled neatly beneath the bench. The air in the gallery was kept at a median temperature to accommodate the 12 different species currently enrolled, which meant it was slightly too cold for his liking. He adjusted his thermal collar, the nanoweave fabric humming softly as it generated heat against his scales. On the screen before him glowed the biometric profile of Cadet Silas Thorne. Species, Terran, classification, Class 5 adaptive apex entity. Vylos flicked his tongue, tasting the recycled air, sensing the pheromones of frustration radiating from his own skin. Class 5. The designation was reserved for species like the Kratak, his own people, who possessed armored hides, redundant organ systems, and the ability to crush durasteel with their jaws. It was for the Chitauri, with their hive-mind coordination and venomous spurs. It was for the silicoids, who could survive in a vacuum for 3 days. He looked down through the transparent steel glass to the training floor below. Silas Thorne stood there, waiting for the drill instructor. The human was soft. That was the only word Vylos could find for it. Thorne possessed no exoskeleton, no natural weapons, no camouflage, and his senses were woefully average. He was a bag of saline and calcium wrapped in thin, easily torn skin. To classify such a creature as an apex entity was not just a scientific error. It felt like a political insult. The drill instructor, a massive four-armed Goran named Krell, stepped onto the platform. Krell's voice boomed through the speakers, magnified to rattle the bones of everyone watching. Cadets, a line. Down below, 20 candidates snapped to attention. The floor was a chaotic mix of biology. There was Vylos' squadmate Bax, a Kratak of the northern brood with scales the color of dried blood. There was a fluid, shifting mass of tentacles that was the Cephalon cadet. And there was Thorne. The human stood straight, his eyes forward, his pulse rate, visible on Vylos' remote monitor, distressingly slow. "The exercise today is environmental endurance," Krell bellowed. "The floor will cycle through 3 biomes. You will hold your position. You will not break formation." Vylos tapped a claw against the datapad. This was where the error would be exposed. Humans came from a world of moderate gravity and abundant water. They were comfortable only in a narrow band of temperature. The floor panels hissed. The simulation began. The first phase was heat. Vents opened, flooding the chamber with superheated air, mimicking the deserts of a sun-scorched moon. The temperature spiked to 50 degrees Celsius, then 60. Vylos watched the data streams. The Kratak cadets barely registered the change. Their metabolism slowed, their scales locked down to retain moisture. The cephalon retreated into a mucus shell. Thorne, however, began to leak. Water poured from the human's skin. It was grotesque. His face turned red, blood pumping furiously to the surface to radiate heat. He looked like he was dying. His heart rate climbed. Vylos waited for the collapse. The human was losing vital fluids at a suicidal rate. But Thorne did not fall. He stood there dripping, his chest heaving, his eyes narrowed but focused. He was cooling himself through the expulsion of water. It was an inefficient, desperate biological gamble, yet it was working. He maintained consciousness where the insected Chitauri were beginning to jitter and fail, their internal chemistry cooking inside their rigid shells. The environment shifted. The heat vanished, replaced instantly by freezing nitrogen mists. The temperature plummeted to 30 degrees below zero. The moisture on Thorne's skin froze instantly. Vylos winced. That should be the end. The thermal shock alone should stop a mammalian heart. Below, the human began to shiver. It was a violent, uncontrollable shaking. To Vylos, it looked like a seizure. The human's muscles were spasming, burning energy to generate heat. Thorne curled his hands into fists, tucking his arms against his torso, reducing his surface area. His skin turned pale as he shunted blood away from his extremities to protect his organs. He looked miserable. He looked weak. But while the massive Goran cadet next to him grew sluggish, its cold-blooded biology forcing it into a torpor, Thorne remained alert. The shivering was a mechanism, not a failure. He was suffering, yes, but he was functioning. The final phase was toxicity. The air was filled with a mild neurotoxin, a paralytic agent derived from the swamps of Zeta-2. The cephalon collapsed instantly. The Cradak cadets, Vylos included if he had been down there, would have to hold their breath, relying on their oxygen storage for up to 20 minutes. Thorne did not hold his breath. He coughed. He gagged. Mucus streamed from his nose and eyes. He fell to one knee. There Vylos thought, finally. But Thorne did not stop breathing. The human system was rejecting the toxin, flushing it out with fluids, while his liver, a hyperactive organ compared to most species, began breaking down the chemical bonds in real time. He was poisoning himself and curing himself simultaneously, second by second. The simulation ended. The vents cleared. Of the 20 cadets, only 7 remained conscious. The massive Goran was asleep. The Chitauri were twitching on the floor. Silas Thorne stood up. He wiped the frozen mucus and sweat from his face with a trembling hand. He looked terrible. He looked like a creature that had been chewed up and spat out by the universe. But he was standing. Vylos turned off the datapad. He felt a flicker of irritation. Mere survival was not dominance. A cockroach could survive radiation. That did not make it a soldier. The classification remained absurd. The human had simply endured. He had not conquered. Later that evening, the mess hall was a cacophony of feeding sounds. The grinding of bones, the slurping of nutrient pastes. Vylos sat with Bax, picking at a slab of synthesized meat. "Did you see the mammal?" Bax asked, his voice a low rumble. "It leaked everywhere. Disgusting." "It survived," Vylos noted, though he did not wish to defend the human. "It survived by luck," Bax dismissed. "Put it in a fight and it breaks. No claws, no armor. Its neck is so thin I could snap it with 2 digits. Vylos looked across the hall. Thorne was sitting alone at a corner table. He was eating a mixture of carbohydrates and proteins, reading from a physical book, paper sheets bound together, an archaic affectation. He looked small. He was not scanning the room for threats. He was not posturing. He was completely still, except for the rhythmic movement of his jaw and the occasional turning of a page. There was something about that stillness that bothered Vylos. It was not the stillness of a rock, but the stillness of a dormant machine. "I intend to challenge him," Vylos said. Bax laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "In the circle. You will kill him, Vylos. The instructors will dock your merits for damaging equipment. We enter the combat phase tomorrow," Vylos said, his eyes fixed on the human. "I want to see what happens when the environment fights back." The combat phase was conducted in the kinetic sphere, a zero-G chamber where gravity could be localized and manipulated. The objective was simple: capture the beacon in the center of the arena. Weapons were set to stun, a neural shock that simulated the pain of a severed limb without the permanent damage. Vylos was paired against Thorne in the 3rd rotation. As they floated in the staging area, Vylos checked his suit. His Cradak physiology was enhanced by light combat armor, boosting his natural strength. He carried a standard-issue pulse rifle and a shock baton. Thorne wore the standard kinetic suit, which looked baggy on his frame. He held the rifle loosely. "Cadet Vylos," Thorne nodded politely. "Cadet Thorne," Vylos replied, keeping his voice cold. "Try not to break." The buzzer sounded. Gravity shifted. Down became sideways. Vylos launched himself off the bulkhead, his claws digging into the metal grate for traction. He moved with the predatory grace of his lineage, a 60-kilogram projectile of muscle and scale. He scanned the arena. Floating obstacles, tetrahedrons of steel, blocked the direct line of sight to the beacon. Vylos anticipated Thorne would move cautiously, perhaps trying to snipe from the perimeter. Vylos activated his magnetic boots and ran along the wall, flanking the human's starting position. He would close the distance, overwhelm the mammal with superior strength, and end this charade. He rounded the corner of a large obstacle, rifle raised, empty space. Vylos paused, his thermal sensors swept the area. Nothing. Suddenly, a proximity alarm blared in his helmet, behind him. Vylos spun, bringing his rifle to bear. Thorne was there, but he wasn't on the wall. He was drifting in freefall, upside down relative to Vylos. The human fired. A blue bolt of energy slammed into Vylos's chest plate. The stun effect washed over him, a wave of nausea and phantom pain. Vylos roared, fighting the neural feedback. He triggered his thrusters, launching himself at the human. Thorne did not retreat. Instead, he fired his own suit's grapple line. But he didn't aim at Vylos. He aimed at a heavy floating crate to Vylos's left. The line caught. Thorne retracted the cable violently. The physics of the maneuver swung the human in a tight arc, accelerating him rapidly. He whipped around the obstacle just as Vylos's tackle passed through the empty space where he had been a second before. Vylos slammed into the bulkhead, his momentum working against him. He turned, snarling. Thorne was now behind the crate, using it as mobile cover. He was pushing it toward the beacon. Cowardice, Vylos hissed over the comms. Face me. Tactics, Thorne replied. His voice was calm, annoyingly calm. Vylos abandoned the wall. He kicked off, diving into the open space. He was faster. He knew he was faster. He zigzagged, dodging 2 shots from Thorne's rifle. He closed the distance to the crate. With a massive heave, Vylos grabbed the edge of the crate and flung it aside, exposing the human. Thorne was waiting. He didn't have his rifle raised. He had his shock baton in one hand and his grapple gun in the other. Vylos lunged, swinging his own baton, a blow meant to shatter ribs. Thorne didn't block. He collapsed. He folded his body, dropping his center of gravity, or where it would be if gravity existed. He let Vylos's swing pass over his head, missing by millimeters. As Vylos overextended, Thorne kicked out. Not at Vylos's body, but at Vylos's wrist. The impact was precise. Vylos's grip faltered. His baton drifted away. In the same motion, Thorne fired the grapple point-blank into Vylos's chest armor. The magnet locked on. Got you, Thorne whispered. Thorne triggered the retract mechanism, but he didn't pull himself to Vylos. He anchored his boots to the beacon, which he had drifted near while Vylos was distracted, and reeled Vylos in like a fish. Vylos was yanked forward, off balance, his arms flailing. Thorne stepped inside his guard. It was a fluid motion, ugly but effective. The human used his elbow, driving it into the soft bundle of nerves at the junction of Vylos's neck and shoulder. It wasn't a strike of power. It was a strike of leverage. Vylos's arm went numb. Thorne spun him around, using Vylos's own mass as a shield against the imaginary reinforcements, and pressed the muzzle of his rifle against the back of Vylos's skull. Bang, Thorne said softly. The simulation ended. The lights returned to neutral. Vylos floated there, his heart pounding against his ribs. He had not been overpowered. He had been dismantled. The human had not used speed or strength. He had used geometry. He had turned Vylos's own aggression into a weapon against him. Back in the locker room, the silence was heavy. Vylos removed his helmet, his scales flushed darker with humiliation. Thorne was 2 lockers down, unlacing his boots. He looked tired. There was a bruise forming on his face where the G-forces had slammed him against his helmet lining. You have. Unexpected reflexes, Vylos said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Thorne looked up. He smiled, a bearing of flat, omnivorous teeth. We played a lot of ball games where I grew up. You commit too hard, Vylos. Once you start moving, you can't change direction. And you can, Thorne shrugged. We're wobbly, it helps. Vylos stared at him. Wobbly. The Class 5 Apex entity described itself as wobbly. The weeks turned into months. The skepticism in Vylos's mind did not vanish, but it began to mutate into a complex fascination. He watched Thorne in every class. In the strategy phase, the cadets were placed in command of simulated fleets. The parameters were strict: manage resources, logistics, and morale while engaging an enemy force of superior tonnage. Most cadets played by the book. The Craddock favored the iron wedge formation, massive frontal assault. The Sions used deception and electronic warfare. Thorne did something that caused the simulation proctors to pause the exercise twice to check for errors. He lied, not just a tactical feint. He broadcasted a surrender signal on an open channel, encoded with genuine emotional distress patterns. He offered up his flagship as a prize. When the enemy AI moved to board, dropping its shields to initiate docking procedures, Thorne detonated his flagship's reactor. He sacrificed his most powerful piece to cripple the enemy fleet, then mopped up the survivors with his swarm of destroyers. After the exercise, the debriefing was tense. That was a violation of the rules of war. A high-ranking proctor, a rigid crystalline entity, stated, "You signaled surrender." "I signaled a ceasefire for negotiation," Thorne corrected, pointing to the logs. The AI assumed surrender. I exploited the assumption. It is dishonorable, Bax grumbled from the back of the room. It's winning, Thorne said. He didn't say it arrogantly. He said it like it was a sad fact of life. If the objective is survival, honor is a luxury I can't afford until the shooting stops. Vylos wrote this down in his personal logs. Subject displays a dissociation between morality and necessity, capable of extreme pragmatism. Dangerous. But the true test, the one Vylos knew would break the human, was the psychological trials, the deep dive. It was a neural interface simulation designed to manifest a species' primal fears. For a Craddock, it was usually the loss of the brood, isolation, the cold dark where their blood would freeze. Vylos exited his session shaken but resolute. He had faced the frozen void and maintained his duty. He was sweating, his pulse high, but he had passed. He waited for Thorne. The human had been in the chair for 3 hours. Most sessions lasted 1. The technicians were whispering. Vylos moved closer to the monitors. What is happening? He asked a technician. The readings are erratic, the technician replied. Usually the subject's cortisol levels spike and stay high. We see panic, then resignation or a fight response. And Thorne, the technician, pointed to the graph. Look. The line was a roller coaster. Massive spikes of terror followed instantly by flat lines of absolute calm. Then terror again. Then calm. He's not succumbing to the fear, the technician said. He's metabolizing it. When the door finally hissed open, Thorne walked out. He didn't stumble. He didn't look shaken. He looked furious. His eyes were dilated, the pupils swallowing the irises. His jaw was set so hard Vylos could see the muscles twitching. He walked past Vylos without acknowledging him, radiating a heat that felt almost physical. Thorne, Vylos said. The human stopped. He turned his head slowly. For a second, Vylos felt a primal spike of fear in his own gut. The face looking back at him wasn't the soft, polite classmate. It was a predator. The wobbly human was gone. In his place was something ancient and violent. Are you injured? Vylos asked, stepping back involuntarily. No, Thorne said. His voice was a low growl, completely unlike his usual tenor. Just processing what? Thorne closed his eyes. He took a deep breath. He held it for 4 seconds. He exhaled for 4. When he opened his eyes again, the monster was gone. The pupils contracted. The tension in his jaw vanished. He was just Silas again. Ghosts, Thorne said with a tired smile. Just wrestling with ghosts, Vylos. I'm going to get some coffee. He walked away, his steps soft and unremarkable. Vylos watched him go. He realized then that the adaptive part of the classification was not just about biology. It was about the mind. Thorne had compartmentalized terror. He had taken the most primal fear his brain could conjure, locked it in a box, and continued to function. That was not normal. That was pathological. The climax of their training came in the final month, the field excursion. The cadets were dropped onto a moonside training zone. It was supposed to be a standard survival and extraction mission. Get from point A to point B, avoid the automated drones, work as a team. But in space, variables change. An ion storm in the upper atmosphere surged unexpectedly. It wasn't part of the simulation. The interference fried the comms. It scrambled the drone targeting protocols. Suddenly, the stunned drones were firing at full power, and the safety dampeners on the environment controls failed. The temperature on the moon's surface began to drop rapidly as the artificial atmospheric shield flickered. The squad was pinned down in a ravine. Bax had taken a hit to the leg, a plasma burn that had melted through his armor. The Cephalon was unconscious from the electromagnetic shock. Vylos was in command, but he was freezing. The cold was seeping into his bones, making his thoughts sluggish. The logic of command was failing him. The manual said to dig in and wait for rescue. But the drones were closing in, their sensors hunting for heat signatures. If they stayed, the drones would kill them. If they moved, the drones would kill them. A logical dead end. We hold position, Vylos slurred, his tongue heavy. Shield wall. No, a voice said. Vylos looked up. Thorne was moving. The human was stripping off his outer tactical vest. He was shivering violently, but his hands were steady. Thorne, maintain formation, Vylos ordered. They're tracking thermal, Thorne said, his teeth chattering. And they're predicting standard military movement. If we sit here, we die. Thorne grabbed a piece of debris, a curved sheet of reflective metal from a destroyed drone. He began to rub it with dirt, mixing the local clay with water from his canteen to create a paste. "What are you doing?" "Camouflage," Thorne said, "not for eyes, for sensors." He smeared the cold mud over his face and neck. Then he looked at Vylos. "Give me your power cell." "My rifle?" "No, the suit core, the heater." "If I give you that, I will freeze in 20 minutes, Vylos said. "If you don't, we all die in 5, Thorne snapped. "Give it to me." There was that voice again, the command voice, the predator voice. Vylos ejected the core. His suit went dead. The cold hit him like a physical blow. Thorne took the core. He rigged it to the reflective metal sheet. He punched a code into the core's regulator, overriding the safety. "I'm going to throw this," Thorne said. "It's going to go critical. It'll create a massive heat bloom. The drones will target it. When they do, I'm going to run for the ridge." "You cannot outrun them," Vylos said. "I don't have to outrun them. I just have to get to the manual override for the sector grid. It's 300 meters. You have no armor. You have no weapon." Thorne grinned. It was a terrible, desperate grin. "I have adrenaline. Do it." Thorne activated the core and hurled it over the ravine edge. 3 seconds later, a blinding flash of white heat erupted. The drones shrieked, their sensors swiveling toward the overload. Thorne scrambled up the wall of the ravine. Vylos watched him. The human didn't run like a soldier. He ran like a beast. He was on all fours for part of the climb, clawing at the dirt. He slipped, fell, rolled, and kept moving. A drone swung around, its laser charging. Thorne didn't stop to dodge. He picked up a rock and threw it. It was a primitive, laughable gesture. A rock against a machine. But the rock hit the drone's sensor array. It didn't destroy it, but the impact jarred the delicate optics for a fraction of a second. The laser fired wide, scorching the rock next to Thorne's head. Thorne reached the ridge. He threw himself at the control panel. He didn't have the codes. He didn't try to hack it. He smashed the panel with the butt of his empty pistol, tore out the wiring, and hot-wired the shutdown sequence by sparking 2 leads together. The drones powered down. The lights on their chassis died. Silence returned to the ravine. Vylos lay in the dirt, his vision tunneling from the cold. He looked up at the ridge. Thorne was lying on his back, laughing. It was a breathless, hysterical sound. The rescue dropship arrived 10 minutes later. In the infirmary 2 days later, Vylos stood by Thorne's biobed. The human was covered in regenerative gel. He had 3 broken ribs, severe hypothermia, and muscle tears in both legs. "You acted illogically," Vylos said. Thorne opened one eye. "Did it work?" "Yes, then it was logical enough." Vylos sat down. The datapad was in his hand. He looked at the file again. Class 5 Adaptive Apex Entity. He finally understood the definition. Other species were apex because they were perfected. The Cradak were perfect warriors. The Psions were perfect thinkers. They fit their niches flawlessly. But if you broke the niche, if you changed the parameters, they failed. Humans were not perfect. They were broken. They were incomplete. And because they were incomplete, they could never be stopped. They filled the cracks. They changed their biology, their psychology, their morality to fit the shape of the problem. They were the variable constant. "You are dangerous, Thorne," Vylos said softly. Thorne chuckled, then winced. "Only when I have to be. That is the problem," Vylos said. "You always find a way to have to be." Vylos stood up. He walked to the window, looking out at the stars. He felt a deep, abiding respect for the creature in the bed behind him. And for the first time in his life, he felt a true, shivering fear. Because he knew that if the galaxy ever truly turned against humanity, if the parameters ever shifted to total extinction, the humans wouldn't just endure. They wouldn't just survive. They would become whatever monster was necessary to win. Vylos looked at the reflection of his own armored face in the glass, then at the reflection of the small, soft human reading a book in the bed. "Adaptive Apex," Vylos whispered. He closed the file. The unease in his gut did not go away. It settled there cold and heavy, a permanent reminder that in a universe of specialized hammers, the human was a fluid, living water that could drown them all. End of report.